So you don't think that a lost civilization instructed the people who built Göbekli Tepe on the use of metals and tools?
I see no evidence for that. I see Göbekli Tepe. I can't go say they instructed them on the use of metals and tools unless I can find evidence for it.
Well, so what did they do?
We don't know.
They generated agriculture. They created a center of excellence around which a hunter-gatherer...
not they who built Göbekli Tepe. The lost civilization that advised them that you think happened.
Yeah.
What did they do if they...
Come through a cataclysm. They're survivors, few in number. This is my scenario. They settle take refuge amongst hunter-gatherers. I mean, I don't know, you're probably have some survival skills. I don't have many. I mean, if we were to have a comet impact in the world today, which were to take out all the underpinnings of modern civilization, I might go settle with hunter-gatherers because they're the people who know best how to live in that situation.
I have no survival skills.
Yeah, so go settle amongst hunter-gatherers, but I might be able to transfer some of my knowledge to them. I might have something that I could transfer to them, and I might have very strong reasons why I might not choose to transfer all of it.
But so, in other words, perhaps this is what happened. Okay, maybe, but how is that different from, well, the aliens advised it?
Well, I don't need.
Lot different.
I think it's massively different. I mean, I don't go there. I don't make that. I don't make that suggestion.
Why
I'm simply
not?
saying, perhaps there's been a forgotten episode in human history. Perhaps its fingerprints are present at a number of sites around the world, but perhaps the extremely defensive, arrogant and patronizing attitude of mainstream academia is stopping us from considering that possibility, and therefore I campaign to get that possibility considered, and I try to do so with as loud a voice as possible.
Well, you're doing it. You're doing it, man.
Wouldn't it disturb you that you run Skeptic magazine and someone publishes something like that? I mean, that goes against the whole idea of critical thinking.
This is one reason we're doing this. One of the reasons we're here is to get your point of view exactly right. All right? So you're saying that there's no evidence that any lost civilization exists. Only the
I'm not saying that.
Only the fingerprints of their influence on later peoples we do know existed.
I'm saying there are physical objects. I say Göbekli Tepe is one of them. I say the Sphinx is another.
But see, this is that argument from either ignorance or personal incredulity. I don't accept the mainstream, or I can't think of how this pyramids could have been built, therefore it was built by somebody else through some other technology.
That's not what he's saying.
That's not what I'm saying.
They're just post-dating it.
I'm saying the Sphinx is older. I do go with Robert Schoch's argument on the geology. I'm also very interested in the astronomy of the site.
What's your thoughts on Robert Schoch's conclusions?
I don't. That's not something I know much about.
Well, you should.
That's a huge factor. It's a huge factor. Because it's all about water erosion.
Mark knows about Schoch, and he rejects him on the basis of that paper.
Yeah.
And that paper really doesn't date the Sphinx. It works with dating of large blocks in the valley and the Sphinx temples. There's not a single sample taken from the Sphinx.
All right, then who dated it?
Who dated it? Liritsis and Vafiadou.
And then why do mainstream archaeologists not accept the older date for the Sphinx? And the answer is because they have a bunch of other evidence that points to the date that they think it does.
The answer to your question is very simple. Mark Lehner and Zahi Hawass put it on record back in 1992 when John Anthony West and Robert Schoch first presented the rainfall erosion evidence on the Sphinx. And what Lehner and Hawass said is, the Sphinx can't possibly be 12,000 plus years old because there was no other culture anywhere in the world that was capable of creating large-scale monumental architecture like this. Show me one other structure that's capable of doing that. Well, they could say that in 1992, Michael, but they can't say it, not since Göbekli Tepe's been
If you don't mind,
excavated.
Graham, could you please, for people, so this could be a standalone thing, people could understand, what is the argument about the Sphinx, the enclosure of the Sphinx? And Dr. Robert Schoch from Boston University, who's a geologist, what was his conclusion?
What Schoch is saying is that the Sphinx and the trench out of which the Sphinx is cut bears the unmistakable evidence of precipitation-induced weathering caused by exposure to a substantial period of heavy rainfall. And that is particularly pointed out in the vertical fissures in the trench. So you see, the Sphinx itself has been subject to so much restoration over so many years that it's difficult for people to even see the core body of the Sphinx today. But it's these, you can see the vertical fissures even down at the back of there. That is what Schoch counts as rainfall, precipitation-induced weathering, heavy rainfall, which is selectively removing the softer layers and leaving the harder layers in place. And the problem is we don't have that rainfall in Giza, in Egypt, 4,500 years ago. You have to go back much earlier to get that rainfall. That's the suggestion.
So that's the suggestion by Robert Schoch, independently of your conclusions.
Totally
or
independently.
Yeah. So that alone would set back at least that one. I mean, it's pretty much established that the Great Pyramid of Giza was constructed about 2,500 BC, right?
There's absolutely no doubt that a huge project went on at Giza around 2,500 BC.
So your argument is
the
not that the whole thing was that much older, was that parts of it seem to have been from an earlier civilization, or at least that civilization far, far earlier than
I would say that the ground plan, what we have at Giza, the basic layout of the site, was established in what the ancient Egyptians called Zep-Tepi, the first time. Astronomically and geologically, I and my colleagues suggest that the first time can be dated to the period of about 12,500 to 13,000 years ago. That was when the site was laid out, because there's intriguing astronomical alignments of the Great Pyramids to the Belt of Orion and of the Great Sphinx to the constellation of Leo, rising due east, housing the sun on the equinox, the astrological age of Leo.
That would align with the geological evidence that Robert Schoch concludes.
It aligns with the geological evidence. The age of Leo pretty much exactly spans the Younger Dryas, as a matter of fact.
And so the only argument against that at the time was that there were no other structures like that from 12,000 years ago.
Correct.
That's not the only argument. It's that, okay, if the Sphinx is built, or the layout for the whole thing is built in, say 10, 11,000 years ago, and then the pyramids are built, 2,500 BC. What happened in between? Where are all the people, the trash, the places where they lived?
Well, there's
in
a bunch
area?
of different styles of construction.
Something like, perhaps again, one can only speculate. And I think there's a lot of speculation on the archaeological side too. One can only speculate, perhaps having gone through a cataclysm, perhaps they felt to blame for this, wrongly or rightly. I mean, there are many, many traditions in which humanity's behavior is implicated in the cataclysm that takes place. And perhaps they didn't want to switch civilization on completely right there. Perhaps they waited, passed down the knowledge through initiates. Enough was there to create a mystery, because it's undoubtedly a mystery that the construction of the Great Pyramids, the first huge pyramids in Egypt, preceded only really by the Zoser pyramid at Saqqara, that the construction of the Great Pyramids is vastly superior to the construction of the pyramids of the 5th and 6th dynasty that follow it. And that's a little bit counterintuitive, that we have this collapse in skills. One would have expected it to got better. So it sounds like the work on the pyramids started already with a level of knowledge in hand.
There's a lot of perhapsing and maybes because yes, well, so you have a bunch of Egyptologists and archaeologists who have been working on this site for centuries. This is one of the most ancient mysteries and so on. And so let's say there's like 20 lines of evidence that point to built roughly around this time period here. And then you come on and say, okay, but there's this one anomaly of the rain thing, and there was only rain at this time. Now there's a huge gap. You have one anomaly or line of evidence here and like 20 here.
Well, we're talking about different structures, so there's not a lot of evidence that points to the Sphinx being from a particular time period.
Well, he's saying like 12,000, right?
I'm saying the rainfall evidence suggests that.
But other evidence.
And its alignment with the constellation of Leo housing the sun at dawn on the spring equinox. It's an equinoctial marker. Nobody would dispute that. Nobody would dispute that the ancient Egypt... Well, no. I mean, if you make a monument pointing perfectly due east... I've stood on the back of the Sphinx at dawn on the spring equinox, and believe me, its head lines up perfectly with the rising sun. But no, I don't think anybody, even Krupp, is disputing that it's an equinoctial marker. Now, here's the thing. You're an ancient Egyptian. You're building an equinoctial marker in 2,500 BC. Do you know what constellation is housing the sun in 2,500 BC?
I haven't run the little program.
Well, it's the constellation of Taurus. So logically, if you're creating an equinoctial... And the ancient Egyptians were not shy about making images of bulls. Plenty of them. If you're making an equinoctial marker in 2,500 BC, you really should create it in the form of a bull, not in the form of a lion. That's the puzzling issue. And yet we do have a time when a lion constellation housed the sun at dawn on the spring equinox, and that is the period of the Younger Dryas.